Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Hendricks with No Limit Ministry. I'm doing a quick response video here to 3 reasons American Christianity is cooked by a genetically modified skeptic. But before I get into that, I just wanted to give a little background and why I'm doing this and what got me involved. For months, I've been burdened by the huge gap in Christian apologetics right now where Christians are spending all this time fighting each other, and we're spending so much time dialoguing in echo chambers and not spending enough time having discussions with the outside world. And I've been burdened by this for months, and I was actually the other day, it was like 2 days ago, I was on the way to a boxing gym, really a huge fan of MMA, but God had me stopped in the parking lot and made it very clear to me that I've been wasting my time and getting in the way of my own calling. So, alas, here I am. And I thought I'd start with this video and kind of point out 3 things I think that he gets wrong here. This is with all respect. Obviously, I think he was very respectful in his video, and this is with all love and respect to him back. I wanted to start out by just acknowledging and conceding the fact that it is absolutely a matter of fact that Christianity has been leveraged by those with bad intentions to do bad things throughout the centuries. Historically, this is an undeniable fact. He's going to have no pushback from me there at all. With that being said, I do think that he narrows in on certain organizations that have been corrupted over time and forgets to mention the good that is being done. For instance, with Samaritan's Purse, they focus on disaster relief, medical missions, and development. And specifically, he brings up like what's going on with Africa and some of the AIDS and HIV epidemics. And this group specifically offers HIV testing and counseling, medical treatments via hospitals and clinics. They provide programs for widows and orphans. And I think there's other organizations like the Luke Commission, again, that he just goes over. Long story short, I just think that he misses what good is being done by Christian organizations and focuses instead on the ones that are not doing good work. So it's actually point number 2 that I take particular issue with Drew's video here, where he states that the abortion issue was used to cover for racism. And I just think this gets at the overarching problem with everything that's going on in this video, where he's pointing to what certain Christians think or do rather than what Christianity actually teaches. For instance, he's attacking Christians rather than Christianity. And I don't think any Christian would argue that there are Christians that have been corrupt throughout the centuries, as I've already conceded this point. But the problem is when you start to subscribe all Christians to what a certain Christian does rather than the actual ideology, you start to get out of line here. And that would be like the equivalent of if I equated Drew to Joseph Stalin for what he did in his militant state atheism enforced under the Marxist-Leninist ideology, and basically where he closed or destroyed tens of thousands of churches, mosques, synagogues, or persecuted priests, monks, rabbis, imams, many of whom were executed or imprisoned, or supported the League of the Militant Godless to promote atheism. I could say, see, this is what atheism promotes, but that's not a fair representation of what atheism is. And you could say atheism isn't an ideology so much, it's a denial of ideology. But I would say that's absolutely not the case, especially when you see people seeking to promote it, for instance, like Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, etc. And I just feel like this is a totally inaccurate representation. And the grand irony of it all is actually that abortion has its roots in racism and eugenics. We have the quote from Margaret Sanger, where she talks about a lot of this stuff, and she says in the New York Times article, as it relates to her support of eugenics, the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. In fact, such sterilization of the unfit, according to her, should be forced in the case of refusal. She states, in case of refusal to use birth control, such persons should have a choice of sterilization or isolation. Under no circumstance should the state allow such parents to cast their diseased and demented progeny upon society for the normal and fit to provide for. This kind of barbaric mindset includes racist undertones. In fact, this was promulgated by many of her contributors in her birth control review. This one comes from W.E.B. Du Bois, where he states, the mass of ignorant Negroes still breed carelessly and disastrously, so that the increase among them, even more than the increase among whites, is from that portion of the population least intelligent and fit, and least able to rear their children properly. How is that not the apex of racism? And you could say that she doesn't support this directly, but in her own letter, she wrote, we do not want the word to go out that we want to exterminate that population. Now, you could say maybe she's trying to clarify her point here, but I think the evidence indicates otherwise. And so it's just a grand irony for Drew here to state that this is something that belongs in the Christian camp of racism when abortion and eugenics actually is a strong history of racism, and it's hard to get around this. And I'm not saying Drew supports this, because I would imagine he's very much against such a thing, but I just think the history is actually against him on this issue. And if we're using the same logic of basically saying that if the founders of a movement believed or were certain ways, for instance, if there were racist founders of the pro-life movement, then therefore anybody who's pro-life is racist, then by the same logic, then Drew and any supporter of pro-choice would also be a racist. It's just not a relevant argument. It's going to get into what I'm trying to get at here in point number 3. So it's here at point number 3 where I really want to delve into the logical inconsistencies that I think are going on in this video, because his point number 3 here has the same problems as point number 2 and point number 1. And so I want to address basically the undergirding fallacies that are going on here. Again, I'm not assuming Drew did this intentionally, and charitably, I'm just going to assume, just like me, he's seeking truth to the best of his ability and presented the facts as he knows how to best. But I still think it's important to talk about what's going on and what I believe is undergirding the video here, even if it is unintentional. And the first is the fallacy guilt by association. It's basically the idea that you're asserting that someone is wrong or bad simply because they share a belief with or are associated with a group or person who has done something bad. That would be like saying, you support ideology X, and so did that person over there, so you must be evil too. And that's obviously erroneous. I don't even feel like I need to say much more about that. And it brings me to the second fallacy, which I think is probably one of the primary problems going on underneath the video here, which is the straw man fallacy, which is misrepresenting someone's actual position to make it easier to attack. I can't imagine that even Drew believes that the majority of pro-lifers today are doing so because they are secretly racist. Now, there might in fact be racist pro-lifers, and they are that way because they're racist. But I just don't think the nun praying outside the clinic is praying outside the clinic because she's racist. And again, that's just my anecdotal observation there. But nevertheless, even if you still think that I'm wrong about this, it's very obvious that this is a straw man going on here, which brings me to the third one, which I think is just undergirding the entire second point that we had just talked about right before altogether, which is the genetic fallacy, which is judging something as true or false based on its origin rather than its merits. So for an example, this would be like, this idea was promoted by a corrupt government, so the idea itself must be corrupt. But that's not a valid statement at all. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. So that would be like me saying, again, Joseph Stalin promulgated communism, and therefore communism is evil because Joseph Stalin is evil. And again, you might believe communism is evil or communism is good. That's fine, whatever. But the argument itself is erroneous. And then it brings me to the final point, which is the non sequitur, which is a conclusion that doesn't logically follow from the premises. Just because an idea was misused doesn't mean that everyone who holds it has the same intention or outcome in mind. And so I think it's very important to just address these real quick as we wrap up here with what he's saying. And one other point I wanted to address real quick was his misrepresentation of the social gospel. I think it's something that's very important to talk about, because there is a difference between supporting those in need through charity versus forcing the hands of people at the threat of a gun to do it. Because at the end of the day, that's what a law is, meaning that we're going to take from you to give to this person over here. And if you don't do it, we're going to lock you up because you're disobeying the law. And I think that's obviously not Christian ethics. I'm not saying capitalism is either. In fact, there are a lot of Christians out there, like he proposes, and he is right about that try to create capitalism as being synonymous with Christianity. And that's obviously just garbage. I don't know what else to say other than that. In fact, Jesus talks about not being able to serve both God and money in the Bible. And I think that's obviously, to his point, a problem as well. But I definitely think he misrepresents the social gospel here as well. But the biggest problem here at the end of the day is the misrepresentations. And I think looking at these fallacies and just acknowledging that these are just, again, the biggest problem here is he's saying that the ideology and those who hold this ideology are guilty of being wrong because this person over here who said they had this ideology also believed those things, or some of those things, or promoted some of those things, or leveraged them to their benefit. But the thing is, throughout the entire video, the biggest problem is that he doesn't spend one moment actually attacking a Christian doctrine. He spends the entire video addressing certain Christians who are out of line with actually the very doctrine of Christianity itself. That being said, I just wanted to conclude this video by discussing his final anecdote here about the moral licensing study, and I just think it's totally inappropriate application, because if you're saying that Christians are somehow more susceptible to this than any other group that just believes that their way of life or their way of thinking is better, you could make the same argument for Muslims. You could make the same argument for Jews. You could make the same argument for even atheist groups that think their version of secular humanism is somehow more morally high than those who are religious, because religion is guilty for all atrocities in the world. And so I just feel like it's just a very inapplicable anecdote to just say this is somehow more, I guess, applicable to Christianity. It's just not a very objective reason for why that would be the case. And so again, I think that's just the biggest problem with the argument in general that's going on in this video, is using corrupt Christians to attack Christianity rather than Christian doctrine itself. Again, that would be like if I were to provide parallels for saying that because Joseph Stalin was an evil atheist, therefore all atheists are evil. It's just not an equitable argument. I don't know how else to say that kindly. The true problem he's identifying here, from my observation, is that the elite and power-hungry abuse the oppressed. Now, guess what? Jesus was sympathetic to all these issues, and you can go look at the Beatitudes for that. As a final note to Drew, I think he has more in common with Jesus in his identification with the moral dilemma going on in society than he probably does even with atheist elitists. So I come into agreement with his final statement, wanting to help people make more informed and thoughtful stances on religious issues. I hope that this video provides some clarity on all this stuff. And again, I am so grateful to any engagement that anybody has with this or provides any feedback or thoughts of your own. I just wanted to provide the context on why I think this video is hopefully unintentionally misrepresenting the Christian stance. And best of luck to Drew in a search for the truth. I am likewise a truth seeker as well. And I just hope that everybody watching this video has a better understanding of exactly what's going on in the Christian world today.